All right, folks, we're coming off a big week in Vegas. We went all in on Tom Kim, and the train was running all the way into the station. So I had to bring on one of my good friends, the model maniac, Byron. I know you had Tom Kim as well. Ah, man, it's Read the Line, Celebrity Insider Show. It's a celebration this week. I mean, I could tell you're celebrating. Look at that shirt, man. Where did you get that shirt? Byron, welcome to the show.
Keith, thank you so much for having me on Read the Line. I can't wait to get into it with you. My wife ordered it off of Amazon for me. She's a treat, and she must have had too much faith in me because I wouldn't have ordered a celebratory shirt off of Amazon to bust out on camera every now and then. But we've actually been busting it out enough, so it's getting into the washer more than I could have hoped when I started doing all of this stuff. So Tom, I love him.
Well, man, I tell you, he is. I saw him at the President's Cup live, and man, I tell you, he's great for golf. 100% behind him, and I mean, maybe Zozo back to back. I don't know. We'll get to that in a minute. If you want to find Byron, you can find him on Twitter at the Model Maniac. He's a Rotoballer contributor. The guy's everywhere. He's great. Not just the content, but the graphics, man. I can't tell you how many people I cut and paste that Thomas the Train running over Patrick Cantlay graphic that you put up this week. I just texted to my buddies when we won. I mean, you are the best. Where does all the creativity come? Before we get into the Zozo, where does all the creativity come from?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a weird guy myself, Keith. So when I just go onto the internet, things just happen for me, I guess, and I just go Google search a few things, and then I just see like a bag of lawn feed, and then all of a sudden Scott Stallings has put himself on a lawn bag of fertilizer or whatever. So it just happens. It comes to me somehow. I've got a Photoshop subscription, and it's been one of the best investments I've made um, outside of golf betting. So it's been a phenomenal little run of creativity and just having a fun time, because a lot of people put out their picks, but just kind of spicing things up a little bit, making these picks like, or a graphic. So I love it. It's a good time for me.
Hey, man, I think it's tremendous. And that's a big reason why you're here is not only just the great picks and the models that you put together and all the hard work that you do behind the scenes, crunching the numbers, but at the end of the day, you also make it tons of fun. We can educate and we can entertain at the same time. So let's do it. Let's get into the Zozo Championship. We're going back to Accordia Golf, Narashino Country Club over there in Japan, Chiba, Japan, right? Par 70, 7,000 yards. Right away, when you start to think of this golf course, this is what, the fourth edition, but only the third one here. What stands out in your mind when you start handicapping this golf course and you start, maybe building a model? I don't know, something crazy for you.
Yeah, I am a big fan of statistics and correlations and trends and things like that because I have come from accounting. So when we go to a course that doesn't have a lot of course history, it gives me a bit of pause. So there's certain things I'll do when going to a venue like this where there's not that big of a correlation between stats, and it's just leaning on iron play. It's one of the most correlatory statistics that can predict success for people. So when I'm a little confused about what a course is going to offer, I dive all in on iron play, strokes gained approach, things like that. So I'm sitting at like 45% of my stats just on iron play this week, and I think with Lindeque winning last year, it kind of validates that. Just great ball strikers can get around this venue quite nicely.
Yeah, there's no doubt this is a ball striker's paradise. Now, there's always this age-old argument in our world about buckets, right? And we're talking about yardage buckets, whether it's for proximity or it's length of holes or whatever it may be, and how relevant they are. It's a really interesting golf course, Narashino Country Club. You know where I'm going with this. I'm going with the par fours.
Yes.
We've got 5 of them under 4.25, and then we've got 5 of them over 485, right? When there's this much variance between the two types of holes, do you then use buckets? Do you use buckets at all? One of the reasons I love having people like you on is that, I want to also educate my readers and my members as to, what maybe somebody who has such a great statistical background like you do you believe in these things? Break it down for me.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to say that one person is specifically very good just from 100 to 125, but over a duration of time, I think those buckets work. So my model uses over a year's worth of data. And I'm a big believer in this, and I've reverse engineered everything, and it looks like statistically, theoretically speaking, we're going to get about 50% of shots coming from 175 to 200 this week, with all the par threes involved and just the average drive of about 305 yards being in the fairway. You're going to have approaches from 175 to 200. So I'm totally okay just spreading the proximity numbers either side of that bucket a little bit, kind of like a crust on the nice soft bread that we have for 175 to 200 with all good juicy butter on there. But I'm a big believer in proximity stuff, and it makes sense. You can definitely see like a person like John Rahm has been struggling with his wedges, and the stats have backed that up over time. So it looks like he's improving a bit, but I believe in them.
All right. Here's another question then. You throw in par threes in your model this week, par three scoring, because we have 5 of them. And, that's 20% of the holes are going to play over the 72 that they do for 4 days. And some folks, they say, well, just if a guy's just good at par threes, how relevant is that to overall to contending?
I think I've baked that into the proximity numbers, because if you're looking at these par threes, they're all sitting, there's one that's 141 yards and the rest of them are above about 170, which puts, if you're sprinkling into the 150 to 175, you're already including one of those par threes, and then the other 3 are all sitting inside that 175 to 200 yard bucket, which I think is how I bake in the par 3 scoring into my model. I don't typically do whole type scoring. I'll reverse engineer it into a proximity situation.
All right, that's interesting. Let's dig a little deeper then. So on a week like this, where we're outside the country, we have a bunch of these coming up, Bermuda, Mexico, and again, this is another reason why you're our celebrity insider this week. You're the model maniac, right? The name that you gave yourself right there on Twitter. Do you build models this week? I know you said you touched a little bit on it, but will you get that in-depth in a model this week where we don't have a ton of statistical analysis with which to back it up?
Correct. And the beauty of this week, it could have been an absolute chaotic situation with all the Corn Ferry Tour guys going over there, but it seems like the field we have, this 78 people this week, are all guys that have given us good track records of rounds in the past. So I'm totally okay leaning on my model this week, especially if I'm going heavy on the approach side of things. I'm a big believer in that, and we know we got some good track record. If we had some Corn Ferry Tour guys sprinkling in here with very little track record, I'm out on the model because I need a long baseline of information. So I'm totally down, and it gives you a bit of an edge. If you pick a lane with the model, especially in the DFS world, you can absolutely, get a little weird, even though you believe that that's the way to go. From a betting perspective, I'm still totally okay going there as well. It's a bit of a no-cut event, which changes things up a bit. But yeah, I'm in on a model this week, absolutely.
You bring up something interesting there. When you start to talk about how many Corn Ferry guys, start to sprinkle into the field, with Bermuda coming, with Mexico coming, and not being all the way over in Japan with this really tight field at 78 players, all right, how many is too many that start to ruin the model, like when we start to talk about Bermuda? Because you remember Bermuda last year, I think they rolled out like Jack Nicklaus to play as part of that field, So like they go pretty deep, so they're going to go deep with these Corn Ferry guys. How many's too many? A third? 20%? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say 20% to a third. There's like 40 of them in the field of 160, so it's right in that range, and it makes a massive difference because we've got guys like Taylor Montgomery, Robbie Shelton, just doing fantastic things, and they're not in the PGA Tour database. They're not in the model because they've all come from Corn Ferry, where the stats are irrelevant and unavailable, to be honest. You're using driving accuracy and driving distance. So to just try to get a general understanding of how these guys go, I resort my model back to the elementary statistics that we try and get away from. We don't want like putting average and scrambling. Those are very vague stats, but I use them just to get a baseline feel for how these Corn Ferry Tour guys will integrate themselves into the PGA Tour. And for Taylor Montgomery, it's been an obvious situation, right? So we got him right, but there's so many other guys that are so good and so volatile. These Corn Ferry Tour guys come from a place where it's hunt or be hunted, and they explode or they just implode, and it's very difficult to bet on them. So I kind of keep my exposure to a minimum early in the season when they're playing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there. I think like just over the last 3 years, you've got a guy like Scotty Scheffler that comes up from the Corn Ferry, and he did what he did. And then last year it was like Steven Yeager was number one, and then he just didn't show up, And he had some good weeks, but he didn't show up like you would think. And then we're on Taylor Montgomery, so there is a lot of variability there, which is kind of interesting. Skills for this week that are going in the model. I know we've talked about iron play. What's something that may be hidden in your model that maybe most people, that when you look at the golf course, when you look at the field, is something that kind of pops out in your mind and you said, you know what, this might be a small key this week, and you're willing to share it with us?
Sure. I'm always willing to share everything because there's been so many people in this industry that have done the same for me. So I'm going to be looking at putting from 5 to 15 feet, which I think is a very reliable range from putting and can give you a really good reflection of how good of a putter someone is. There's volatility outside of that range. You can gain a bunch of strokes if you get lucky on one or two long putts. But from 5 to 15 feet, you got to be very good. And if you are very good, you're going to be consistently good from that range. So I'm a big fan there, especially with scores being low. A lot of par saves are going to come into the play, and that's kind of mixed in with some bogey avoidance. So, and then again, I'll just go back to the fact that I got 10% of my model stats from 150 to 200 yards in proximity buckets. So I'm a big believer in that, and I'm definitely going there. And then just some sprinkling in of off the tee, a little bit of distance, but mainly the putting and the approach play, I think, for me is going to be key this week.
It's really interesting because, you coming from an accounting background and I come from a PGA background, and we basically kind of do the same thing, but yet I look at it very much from like a golf playability point of view. So when I see approach, you're looking purely at the numbers, and I'm looking at the golf course going, well, this player is going to need to hit, like I said earlier, he's going to have 20% of his holes are going to be tee shots off of a par 3 that are in a certain bucket of distance. And I'm like, 20% is a ton of shots when you start to break down rounds and you're not considering putting, So it's really cool how these two worlds kind of come together. I love it each and every week. Course conditions this week. Does that change at all the model, considering, and I'm not talking about bent grass versus zoysia or anything, but looks like it's really wet over there in Japan right now. Will that slightly alter things from time to time, week to week?
I don't know, Keith. It's tough for me to figure out if a wet, are you going to ramp up the distance a little bit because the ball's not rolling out? Or are you going to ramp up the accuracy metrics because if you're in the fairway, you got to get the ball in your hand because it's muddy? I'm not entirely sure, and I don't think it's that big of a deal for me. I'm still going to just rely on the approach play. If you're a really good approach player, I think you're going to be just fine, particularly if you get your ball in your hand. And yeah, I don't really have too much of a take on the weather conditions, and I try not overthink it because I'm already getting pretty specific with some things. So what is your take on the weather, Keith? How's that impacting you?
Well,
Maybe you can help me out.
Honestly, I just feel like it really determines scoring. So if it's firm and fast, then the scoring is going to be much higher than usual. And if it's going to be soft, then the place is going to be a dartboard. And I think you have to then maybe skew things a little bit more towards birdie or better percentage or somebody that can score. Because that person's proximity, and of course, a lot of these things are, they're interrelated, but I really think that that's the only difference that the weather makes. I don't get into changing distances or anything like that. I think that's, I think you're getting way too deep in the weeds there, Overall, it's been really wet over in Japan. They've had a ton of rain in the last 30 days, so this place will be a dartboard. Even though they have 2 greens on every hole, both of the greens are going to be wet. So,
2 dartboards. Yeah, you love to see it.
It's kind of crazy. All right, let's do this then. Let's talk about, we've broken everybody in here. Everybody wants to know, who's the model maniac picking? Let's start with the chalk. We'll go at the top of the board. Who do you like?
So I never bet too many guys out inside the 30 to 1 range. So I'll give you a pick that I would have gone with if I went solo dart with it, and that would be Xander. I think in his no-cut events, is going to be a premium player. He's back in Japan again. He's got the good vibes in Japan, and his game just in general is just so beautiful for this golf course, right? He's a good driver of the ball, and he can make a bunch of putts. If the scoring conditions are difficult, they're easy, he can do it. So Xander's going to be my chalk pick. I don't know if I should suggest stuff that I haven't bet, but I'd go for him if I was going to the top of the board.
Top of the board. I'm going to ride the train another week. I'm going there again.
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I'm telling you. This is one of the things when you go to events and you have access to the range and to the players and inside the ropes, and you walk with a guy like Tom Kim, you realize that there's something special about this guy. And to have 2 wins on the PGA Tour in his first 4 events, the other 2 being playoff events, I mean, there's something going on there. I mean, he stood down Patrick Cantlay, the Iceman, on Sunday, and he took care of business. So, do I definitely think Patrick's performance on 18 was an outlier? Yes, but Patrick's the type of guy that forces another guy's hand. Tom Kim forced his. And that to me is really interesting from a golf professional, from a coach's point of view. I mean, that's an intangible that just doesn't exist in a lot of players. And having seen that under, golly, so much pressure that was taking place at the President's Cup. I mean, a lot of people, I don't know if Trevor Irwin told this story. When he hit that famous 2-iron in the fairway on 18 on Saturday evening, right? The whole U.S. squad pulled up behind him in carts. You had wives, assistant coaches, JT, Jordan. They pulled up right behind him, and it was a total like baller move. Like, hey, this is our home turf, and you need to hit a shot, and we're gonna watch you do it. And then he pulled it out. Not only did he hit the shot, then he made the putt on top of it. That to me is something where this golf course may fit him better than Vegas when you think about it as a ball striker. Yes. So I'm going to ride the train. I'm going there. Middle tier, I start to look at some of the unique things because these guys in the middle, and it sounds like above 30, this is probably your wheelhouse. So I'll let you go first, but who do you love in the middle tier? Give me 1 or 2 names.
Sure. I've got Mito Pereira, who's, he's just one of those long-hitting, ball-striking beasts. He led the Shriners last week in approach. We know his irons can get hot. I think we can maybe dodge a few putting blunders that he typically has. I love his ball striking at this venue, and he seems like he's in a reasonable price range too. He was up at the top of the board there. He was in the mix and just couldn't get it done. So maybe leaving the country helps him out a little bit this week.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the pressure is becoming a little bit of a characteristic of Mito. It popped up at the Presidents, obviously the PGA. And I think the best place for a guy like him to win his first time is outside the country on the PGA Tour. 100%.
Yeah. It's like a mini Victor Hovland kind of vibe, right?
Totally. Yeah. Almost, no pressure. Famous line from Tiger Woods, right? He once told me, Keith, all pressure is self-induced. All right? So when it comes to the Hovlands and the Cam Youngs and all those guys, or Xander. You talk about Xander's drought. All of that came from Xander. It didn't bother him, what was going on around him. It was internal, whether or not he could, kind of get over that hurdle. And I feel like Mito outside the country is a very, very strong pick. I'm going to go with the king of the Zoysia grass with Sepp Straka. I loved your graphic yesterday.
Yes.
It's a real thing. When we were in Wilmington, they said, this is a Sepp week that he has to bring his own drinks because it was a Pepsi week, in the media center. And I just laughed because I love Diet Coke too. So Sepp on Zoysia is just phenomenal for whatever reason. And I'm going there in the middle. How about a long shot? What do you like?
Well, I just want to double down on you and say I've got Sepp as well. Obviously, love him there. And then for a long shot, I actually had Sepp. So I'm going to pivot to Matthew Neesmith, who I think is still available in the 70 to 1 range.
Right.
I don't know if that classifies as a super long shot, but
in this field it does.
Neesmith as well. Yeah, I guess it does because it's such a small field. He's also just been trending in the right direction. When it comes to outrights, I typically look for a bit of a smaller sample size of good current popping form, and he's just been phenomenal on approach lately. And if I'm going to be weighing that heavily, Neesmith's your guy. He's also been at the top of the board, going to leave the country, less pressure. The Japanese people are very polite over there. Hopefully they don't, bring a pressure cooker atmosphere when he's at the top of the leaderboard. So Matthew Neesmith for me at 70 to 1 is going to be a long shot.
For me, there's no better long shot than Adam Long this week. That's it right there. I'm going there. All right. How about a fun best bet? Something that caught your eye. Is it a nationality prop? Is it a placement? Is it a head-to-head? Give me one quick one for the readers.
I've got 1.5 quick ones for you. I've got Matthew Neesmith for a top 30 at even money, plus 100. I just think he's just striking the ball really well. If in case he doesn't win, that top 30 gives you basically got to beat like half the field. So I think he can absolutely do that at even money. We were just talking about football. I think that's a bit more of a certainty than the Chiefs winning a game. But yeah. And then one quick one, Tom Kim as a player's future at 40-1 is one of my favorite bets I've found just perusing the odds boards. So players 40-1, Tom Kim. I think that number is going to be a very, very much lower when we get there.
Man, talk about a model matchup for that place. I mean,
yes,
unbelievable. Yes. That is, oh man, that is a good one right there. All right, so
yeah, DraftKings,
folks. This is why the Model Maniac, Byron, you are our celebrity insider this week at Read the Line. Where do you publish? Where can people find you? I know they're going to want to get more of your content after this interview.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, catch me at the Model Maniac on Twitter, and then all my content is pretty much out on Rotoballer. I also do a DFS show for BetSperts with PJ Splits 101. So I'm all over the place, but if you just go to my Twitter handle, you should find everything that you need from there.
You know what? I found everything I needed today for the Zozo. Can't thank you enough, Byron. We'll do this again sometime. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Keith.